Today I want to finish this topic on wellness. I don't think I'm finished with it, but this week alone, the Indiana Chamber of Commerce, they put on a wellness and mental health workshop. It was Tuesday, and it was a 2-day mental health and wellness workshop for employers and employees. And the reason why they put it on was simply because they come to the realization that since the pandemic, in which this was going on before the pandemic, but everybody kind of was in the closet on it, and now since the pandemic, everybody's talking about it, that people are coming to work and they're not well. They're coming to work depressed. They're coming to work with other mental illnesses. And most people are saying, well, it's because of the pandemic. I don't know what's brought it on. But the real issue is people are now shedding more light on it. And for 2 days, they talked about mental health and wellness. And they said it's so important to help the employee to get well. Because if you don't, you may have a whole lot of workplace stress and workplace trauma. You do understand that in many ways, and they said this in the article, go on Fox 59 and you can read the whole article. They said if people are not healthy mentally, it really doesn't matter what they're like physically. Because you got a lot of physically strong people who are not mentally well taking other people's lives. And so they understand also if folk are not well mentally, you cannot expect them to be real productive even though they're physically well. Because their minds are wrapped up in what it is that they're dealing with internally. And so I want to finish the last thought of David in his spiritual and mental wellness. Thus far in 1 Samuel 21, I talked about David was under pressure. And I talked about he was under pressure because Saul was paranoid. I'm not going to go back and talk about that, but you can go back and read it. And then I talked how David's pressure led him to take matters in his own hand, and he found himself in an unusual predicament of lying. I moved from there to dealing with how when you're not mentally well, sometimes you say stuff you shouldn't say. He told a lie. When you're not mentally well, sometimes you do things you should not do, even though you're spiritual. He was spiritual. I pointed that out. But he said some stuff he shouldn't say because he was under pressure from Saul. Then he ended up doing some things he shouldn't do. Last week, I talked about how Reverend Squires, he act like he was insane. And here's what I don't care. And the reason why I'm preaching this, it doesn't matter who you are and what you have and what your status is. You can get out of pocket when you allow your mental and emotional to override your spiritual. David began to leave his dependence. He left his dependence on God, and he took matters into his own hand. And as a result, he was not spiritually and mentally well. And today I want to conclude and help you somewhat figure out a way to get out of it. And I said last week, when you're going through it, never think that you're the only one going through it. Because you leave chapter 21 of 1 Samuel and go to chapter 22, David now runs to this cave of Adullam. And there he's thinking about what happens in his life. 1 Samuel 22 now, if you're taking notes. But I'm not going to preach from there. I'm going to preach from Psalms 142. And when he gets to that cave, guess what? There were some other men who was going through it just like David. And 1 Samuel 22 tells us It was those that was in distress. That's verse number 2. Those that were in debt and those who were discontent. You can put up 1 Samuel 22, verse 2 if you want to. Now, David was already in distress. We know that. But then these men joined him. And those who were in distress. Now here's David in a cave. Just had got finished acting like an insane man. And then there were some other people who were not well because Saul was chasing them, and they joined David in this cave. Notice how it starts out. Those who were in distress. Another word for those that were in distress is those who were dealing with anxiety. High anxiety. And let me tell you something. If you're dealing with high anxiety, how many of you know that works on your wellness? Those who would keep it up, that was in distress. But then he says, those that were in debt. How many, now I know I ought to get a witness right here. How many of y'all know that being in debt is not a good feeling? How many of y'all know debt can cause you to lie? Debt can bring about stress. Debt can make you answer the phone and say, I'm not here. Debt will make you borrow money from Peter to pay Paul and then turn around and rob Paul and give it back to Peter. They were in debt because Saul, the king, had put taxes on them. Hang with me, and I promise I'm going to make the transition. And then it says those who were discontent. Notice what they did. They gathered around him. Discontented people have a way of finding other people who are discontent. Listen, it's not easy to find a community that distributes the same behavior as you. Look. Anybody can find a community to fit their behavior. When you're living in an academic community, you find those people to live with. If you're sophisticated, you find those people to deal with. But let me tell you something. Get raunchy if you want to. You can find those people too. You want to be sassy? There's a sassy community. And the real truth about it is you ain't doing anything because you find people like that. What it really says is that there's just people who are dysfunctional like you. And are y'all hearing me? David was acting real dysfunctional at this moment, and these men came to join them. Well, let me put it another way, and here's a nicer way. You can also find people with disabilities like you. And since I'm talking about wellness, let me put it another way. You can also find people who are not well like you. And the reason why I started with dysfunction, because some of it is outright dysfunction. And let me tell y'all why we got so many, Ryan, in your prayers, and you're certainly right, why we got so many shootings and killings in our neighborhood. You know why? Because there's a lot of people, and you hear me, y'all hear me clearly, who've learned how to function with their dysfunctions and call their dysfunctions normal. Now, and Sister Henderson, you know this. They know it's not normal, but they call it normal. I wish I had time to make you think. Everybody say, think with me. You see, there's a whole lot of us are trying to diagnose people who know better. And this is why the academicians have to watch it, because there are some people who know what to do, and they can, and listen, but they don't do what they know. Or you hear me? You see, now there are some times when people have disabilities and they need medication. But there's another time when people have demons and they need God. And see, your wellness, sometimes you need to go to the therapist and the psychologist and the counselor. I'm with y'all on that. And the psychiatrist, and you need medicine, and you need therapy, and you need group sessions, and you need social workers. And I'm saying this, if you had that disability, you better hurry up and go. We'll take you. But then there's another predicament when you are outright demonically influenced and you know what to do and you don't do what you know because you got a spirit of stubbornness on you and a spirit of pride and a spirit of anger. You need deliverance, and you got to go and cry out to God and say, help me to get through this stuff. And you got to watch trying to listen. There's a difference between the clinical and the spiritual. Clinical get treatment. Clinical go to the counselor. Clinical go to the psychiatrist. Clinical go see someone who can get you help. But spiritual, let me tell you something. You got to go to God and ask God to deal with this demon of crack. Deal with this demon of cocaine. Deal with this demon that is in my life. So I got to go from there. David found these people. And when you get to Psalms 142, here's a way to help us to get out of it. We get out of it, y'all, when we come to the conclusion that I've been depressed long enough. I've been defeated long enough. Watch this. I've allowed my emotions to dictate to me long enough. I've allowed my discontentment to control me long enough. I got people with me, but I'm still feeling this way. I'm talking to them about how I feel, and that's a good thing. But even though I'm talking to them horizontally, I got to do something vertically. Psalms 142, Psalms 34 are direct letters of what David did or done when he was in that cave. If a doctor was treating you, they would say to you, here's the prescription to get out of your emotional cave without ever taking medicine. Here's how you get rid of it when the doctor can't help you. Here's how you get rid of it when you've tried everything else. He says, the first thing, verse number 1 in Psalms 142, I cried out loud to the Lord. I lifted up my voice to the Lord for mercy. Here's how you get rid of it. He said, how I get rid of it is that I got to go to the Lord. And notice what he said. I didn't go to him with a pretty prayer. I didn't go to him murmuring. He said, this stuff had me down to the core. He said, and I went and I didn't say, God, please help me. I went and I say, God, I've had enough. Can you please help me? That's what he says. Notice what he says. I cried out loud to the Lord. Now I want y'all to hear me today. Notice what he said, because he had other men with him. He said, but I knew that they couldn't handle it. He said, but I went to someone. Elohim means that he is the self-existent, created God. He said, I went to the Lord who's able to help me. Why do you think David went to the Lord? He went to the Lord, notice this, because he knew that the Lord was omnipotent. That's number one, that he had all power and that he could help him. But watch this, Sybil. He also went to the Lord because he knew that the Lord was omniscient. Hear me, y'all. Now here's where we blow it at. He knew that the Lord knew already what he had said, what he had done, done and how he had acted. I want y'all to hear me. The reason why a lot of us don't go to the Lord and be honest, because we think that somehow, because we've hid our feelings from people, that we've hid them from the Lord. David went to the Lord because he already knew that the Lord was omniscient, and he knew what he was feeling, and he also knew that he was doing. So guess what David said? You know what? I may as well come clean. He said, so I'm going to the Lord, and I'm going to cry out to him. And notice what he says. I'll lift up my voice to the Lord for mercy. Y'all got to hear me today. He says, I'm asking God to help me by showing me mercy in my situation. Now hear me today. If you're feeling a certain way, if you're discontent right now, if you are disoriented about what's going on and you are not well, you got other people who are around you and yet you cannot connect with them. David says what you got to do in order to get well is for you to go to God and cry out to God and just say, Lord, I need you to be merciful to me. Listen, let me say something to us today. Let me tell y'all something. Listen to me closely. The only solution to some of our mental wellness is to go to God and ask him to be merciful to us. And I'm going to tell y'all why. Because some of the stuff you said, thought, and done, nobody else knows about it. And what you're dealing with right now, in many ways, is the repercussions of it, the guilt of doing whatever it is that you've done and what you wasn't supposed to do. And now you're dealing with it. And then after all, David had learned that 85 priests had been killed because of a lie that he told. And what he's actually saying is that, God, the only way that I can deal with these thoughts and these feelings is that I'm going to ask you to have mercy on me. Y'all come here. Sometimes, y'all, when things are not right in our emotions and they are not right in our spirits, I don't care how many glasses of Hennessy you drink. I don't care how many joints you smoke. I don't care how many girls you get with. I don't care how many games you watch. I don't care how many schools you graduate from. I don't care how many vitamins you take. I don't care how many trips you go on. When you come back home, you are still down with your emotions. You are still down with your feelings. You are still down in your spirit. You are still down with your own get up, your persona, your swag, your personality is dressed up on the outside, but still deep down inside, you have slid to a hole that you can't get out of. And the only way you can get out of that hole is to say, wait a minute. You got to go to him and say, help me, God. I'm tired of how I'm feeling. Help me, God. I'm tired of what I'm going through. Help me, God.